I picked up this flip kit. It's by MaxTrac from Amazon for 47 bucks. And I also went ahead and got some 3-inch lowering springs. So this will be a 3.5 drop. And it should be fairly straightforward. I haven't seen anything about this MaxTrac brand anywhere on the internet, so I figured I would be the one to see if it's crap or not. And the one thing I do have to say is the website, even not just on Amazon, says that the flip kit comes with all hardware. It didn't come with anything, and that's what I was expecting. So I ended up having to go to AutoZone and pick up some U-bolts as well. And I mean, the finish is really nice and stuff for 47 bucks. I mean, good deal, I think, still, even if their description is wrong. And so I'm just going to put this all on. And to make that easier, I'm going to start with the back. And what I've already done is I took out the 6 T55 torx bolts for the bed. I'm just going to take that out real quick. It's just those 6 bolts and the wiring harness for the lights. If you're only doing that by yourself, it's actually really easy to take the rear bumper off. It's just 4 bolts. And you can just slide it over the back, especially if you take the wheels off. But I'm going to get that done and I'll come back. I got the bed off. Like I said, it was just a 6 T55 torx. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to detach the rear axle from the leaf spring. You can see there's just the 4 bolts. Well, the 4 nuts on the U-bolts. These are 18 millimeters, so I'm going to back them off. I do have the truck. This is picked up by the frame. And one thing I forgot to say is the filler neck, before you take the bed off, just make sure you take that off. They're just 3 7mm bolts in that, and it just pops right out. So now I'm going to get the axle taken off of the leaf springs, and then I'm going to take the leaf springs off and see you then. Alright, so I got the U-bolts off. Those are just the 18mm nuts. And then I went and took the leaf springs off the shackles. Those were just 13/16 for some reason. They're not 20 or 21 millimeters. And those were a pain in the ass to get out, but I got them all out on both sides. And if you're doing this at home, what I would do first is take off the shocks from the axle. There's just a 15 and a 17mm nut on the back. Just take those out, then do the leaf springs, because that made it quite a pain to get them off after. Other than that, no real issues doing this. I did have to take the bumper off, but that's just 4 19mm bolts. Just because the way that these shackle bolts were put in, they had to be hammered out in that direction. And this bracket right here was blocking it. But that was quick and easy anyways. Alright, now what I gotta do is I gotta lower the frame back down because my jack stands aren't tall enough to pick this axle up close enough to the frame. So I'm going to lower these jack stands up here so the frame's closer to the ground so I can get this axle closer. And then what I also did is I went ahead and got these brackets pretty snug on the leaf springs. The instructions that it came with said that the hole goes towards the front of the truck. And with these leaf springs, you can tell it's the rear if you forget. The rear has these on it, and the front does not. But yeah, just gonna get it lowered so I can get those back on. Alright, I got it lowered pretty decently, so now I'm gonna pick the axle up on the jack stands, slide the leaf springs under, bolt them back into the shackles, and go from there. Should be pretty much downhill from here. Alright, so I got the leaf springs back in, and then I just dropped the axle back down. You can see how it keeps the alignment as far as your pinion angle is these blocks basically just go in here, and this rests on top of that. And kind of hard to tell with the bed off, but it's definitely sitting a lot lower. I ended up deciding just to reuse the original U-bolts. I didn't have any problems getting them off, and they seem in good shape. Maybe if I put a block in here to lower it even more later on, I might use them. Or if I find a problem with these. One thing is the instructions very clearly say that that hole in this bracket goes to the front. I don't know if you can tell, but the U-bolts are kind of slanted forwards a bit, and I'm wondering if it's actually meant to be the other way. I'm not sure, but all I gotta do now is put those shocks back on the axle and then tighten the U-bolts. Shouldn't tighten them up until you got it actually properly resting on the ground. So I'll get that. Alright, so I got the shocks all hooked back up. Got the, I rolled it around a bit. Tightened down the U-bolts. Everything seems pretty good. You can definitely tell that she's squatting in the rear. I'm gonna get the bed on. It's right out there. And then we'll see how she looks, and then we'll get to the front. Alright, so I got the bed back on. You can definitely tell that it is sitting pretty low in the rear. So now, just gotta get these coil springs in the front. So I'm gonna start with taking the wheels off, put it on jack stands, take the wheels off, and go from there. Other than taking the bed off, I am doing this by myself. So I'm about 6 hours into it. We'll see how long this takes. I got it picked up and the wheel off. I guess what I'm gonna do is just take off the sway bar end links. Probably have to take off the brake caliper just so that the lower control arm can come down enough. And then it'll just be getting the shock out of the coil spring. One bolt up there, two on the bottom. And I'll go from there. Alright, so got everything detached. I'm gonna have to pick up the truck hire just to drop the arm enough to get the spring out. One thing I have to say is don't make the mistake I did. Take the fucking shock out, like first thing. Don't do anything else, and that'll make everything a lot easier. One problem I've been having with this thing is there's metric and standard everywhere on it. You got your ABS sensor right here, that's an 8mm. And the line, well, just the wire for it, also bolts up here with another 8. This was the 9/16, and the ones on the bottom of the shock down there. You can see the stud for it actually. Those were 14s. I knew that the end links, because I've changed them out before, were 5/8 on both ends. These were both different sizes of standards. I forget exactly which ones. But you just take that out, get yourself a chisel, stick it in the gap, bang it out a little bit, and it'll come right down. The brakes, it's not actually hanging by the line, it's just actually long enough to just sit on the ground. That was 14mm and a 15 for the 4 bolts. I had a problem getting it off, so I just took it apart. And so now I'm going to pick the truck up, pull that shock out, and hopefully get enough room to drop the arm low enough to get that spring out. I'm about 40 minutes into this now. Got the old spring out. I just ended up cutting it. I didn't want to rinse the spring compressor tool. And so now I just got to put the new one in there, put the shock back in and bolt it back up and go to the other side. Alright, got everything bolted back up. Didn't run into any issues at all. It was fairly straightforward. So now I'm going to put the wheel back on it and lower it back down. The one thing that I did have to do is use one of these clamps just to seat the pistons back in the caliper, just so I could slide it on easier. No big deal. And I'll go over to the other side now. Alright, so I got everything done. It's been a couple days, put about 500 miles on it. Everything seems to settle quite nicely. It was sitting a little high for a bit, but after just driving it a little bit, you can see that's the gap in the front. In the rear, it's pretty much the same. There's nowhere to park it quite level around here, but it definitely sits more straight instead of being raked to the front. I think it looks pretty good. I'm only into this because I didn't use the U-bolts for like $180. I don't know if you can see, but there's definitely probably about 3.5 degrees of camber on both of the front wheels. You can definitely feel it going down the road. But I do plan on doing another 2-inch drop in the front and a 2-inch drop in the rear with some DJM shackles and lower and upper control arms by DJM in the front. That's gonna be like $800, so it's gonna be a little bit. I must say it looks pretty good. The whole reason I even started doing this because the driver's side coil was kinked, so the front end was sinking down to that corner quite a bit. This truck does have 250,000 miles on it, but all together I was in it for like 8.5 hours, $180. Came out looking really good, I think. You can see I got the factory mud flaps on it, and they're pretty close to the ground. I'm gonna have to take those off if I drop it anymore. The 500 miles I put on it only hit the rear axle on the frame once. That was a pretty bad bump. Must say I'm very satisfied with this MaxTrac 5.3 drop. Came out quite nice. So next plans for the truck, because I will be turboing it. You can see the previous owner, instead of just taking the bed off, cut a hole in the bed. I don't know why they did that. It's so easy to take the bed off of these things. But I'll be putting a 20-gallon fuel cell in it, new injectors, getting it ready for E85. You can see it's got quite a bit of hail damage on it, but every part for this truck is really cheap other than this roof. You can see it's really badly golf balled. Over there, there was a bunch of Bondo on it, knocked it out, especially in the corner over here. You can see how deep that is. It's like 1 inch. It's really cratered. You can still see some of the Bondo right there. Might cut a roof off another Ranger or just buy an OEM panel, but they're like $500. I'm not sure yet. I lost my hubcap up there recently, right before dropping it actually. It's a nice little truck, I like it, 5-speed, 2.5 liter. Definitely looks a lot better with this drop.